So today we're starting a new series. Now in my animal spotlight videos, we'll talk about each of my animals and what they're like in the wild, where they're from, how they survive, what eats them, their conservation status, etc. And then in my care videos, we'll talk in depth just about that animal and how to take care of it as a pet, what you need for enclosure size and type, substrate, what you can feed them, their heat and humidity requirements, things like that. In these videos though, I'm just gonna keep it kind of brief. We're just gonna go over some quick pros and cons to each of these animals and what it's like having one as a pet. And this is not going to be a full-on care guide for how to take care of these animals as pets. It's just going to be a quick list of some good things and bad things about having each of these animals as a pet. And when I made this video and when I kind of started this series, what I had in mind, it wasn't necessarily reptile enthusiasts who already follow a bunch of reptile YouTubers and know a lot of reptile stuff. What I'm thinking of are people that I deal with a lot at my programs, like parents and kids that are looking at their first or second or even third pet reptile maybe, and if it's a good fit for them. So the information I'm going to be doing in this video, it's going to be pretty basic, it's going to be easy to digest, it's going to be easy for people to understand that aren't well versed in like reptile lingo. So like parents, if you're watching this, you don't need to know about the UV spectrum or calcium with D3 or without. I'm just going to kind of give you a general gist if this is a good pet reptile or if it's not so much, kind of like an iguana. So to kick it off with our first ever pros and cons video, we're going to do the ever famous bearded dragon. And this ties into our first pro with them. Being the most popular pet reptile on the planet, they are very widely available. They are very easy to find. I'm talking like pet stores, reptile expos, private breeders. Even if you check with like local animal rescues, they'll sometimes get them in. I get bearded dragons in very often. And then also if you're looking just for one being rehomed on Craigslist, they are everywhere. It is very easy to find a bearded dragon looking for a home. Now where you want to get one though kind of varies on your mileage with reptiles. If you're just a parent looking for your kid's first ever pet reptile, then a pet store bearded dragon is going to be fine for you because you might not know where reptile expos are near you. You might not know if there are any private breeders with them, and maybe you don't want to get a Craigslist bearded dragon. So, and pet stores get a lot of flack because a lot of the kind of reptile community are like, oh, pet store people don't know anything. But again, this also varies store to store. I mean, my first job in college was working at a pet store, so obviously their reptile section I like to think was pretty well kept, and the customers had a reliable person to go to with reptile questions. But if you go to the store in the next town over, maybe they had no one that knows reptiles. So it really varies. So this is why you need to do your own research on what you need. Saying that though, don't just go into a pet store and buy the first bearded dragon you see. Make sure you can verify that it's eating, it's healthy, it's a good weight, it's not like malnourished, that it's pooping everything regularly. Don't just trust the employee 100%. Because I mean, with parents, it's very unrealistic to expect them to do the same thing that reptile enthusiasts do. I mean, I'll drive 4 hours for an expo, sure, but a parent might not really want to drive 8 hours round trip to the nearest reptile expo just to get their son a bearded dragon. Now, saying that, if there are reptile expos really close to you and you can make one, I would recommend getting a bearded dragon from a breeder there, especially because you can get their card, you can ask them questions if anything comes up with the bearded dragon after you bring it home. It's just, there's a lot more kind of connection with the breeder than just buying one from the pet store. And on top of that, parents might not feel comfortable trying to get a bearded dragon off Craigslist because what if they get a sick one? Now, I would know what to do, but obviously they don't have the experience for that. And they also might not feel comfortable buying a bearded dragon from a reputable breeder online, like on Fauna Classifieds or something, and having it shipped to them. They've never had reptiles shipped to them. So there's a lot of factors. So I will say, and I might get flack for, but I will say pet store bearded dragons, not the end of the world. This is the #1 reptile that comes in through my doors being surrendered to me every year. And that happens for a variety of reasons, but chief among them is this is a fairly decent sized lizard that needs a pretty big living space. It's not like a leopard gecko that's fine in a 10 or 20 gallon tank its whole life. And just about every online care source for bearded dragons, for some reason, says adult bearded dragons are fine in a 40 gallon tank for its whole life. Have you ever seen an adult bearded dragon in a 40 gallon tank? That's one right there. Does that really look big enough? For some reason, the reptile keeping hive minders decided that a 40 gallon tank is enough for an adult bearded dragon. I don't really think that's enough. Even if as adults their activity level isn't quite as much as like monitor lizards or most snakes, I still think they should have enough room to comfortably move around. I'd say a 55 or better yet a 75 gallon tank like you see for Gandalf here would be good. And if you're doing say something not like glass like PVC or wood, then a 3x2 or a 4x2 would probably be best. But this takes up a good bit of desk or table space if this is like your only pet and you're trying to fit into say your bedroom. So this is something you need to be aware of. Bearded dragons are probably the lizard that I would best describe as friendly and just really laid back. I mean, when they're young, they're obviously going to be very scared of everything. They'll be very dartish and running away. And then sometimes as they get older, they can be a bit spicy and attitude-ish, and some of them will keep that with them as they get bigger. But for the vast majority of bearded dragons, once they hit about the year mark, they are just very chill, laid back, mellow lizards. Bearded dragons are probably the best reptile to just scoop them out and hang out on the couch and watch an episode of TV with. They're not going to get all slithered into and coil up and around things like snakes can. Believe me, it's not easy to get a snake out of a couch. And they're not going to be really small and fragile and potentially dropping things like geckos can. They're not going to be really big and potentially destructive and knocking things over like tegus or monitor lizards could. They're just the best reptile to just kind of hang out and chill with. And I do want to stress that this is mostly for adult bearded dragons. When they're little, like I said, they're going to be very darty and afraid of things, but if you handle them as they get older and you work with them and get them used to your presence and stuff, just about every bearded dragon I think I've ever worked with has been very easy to just do this with. On top of needing a pretty big living space, they also like it hot and they need a UV light. And with your basking spot, you're going to need the temperature somewhere in the 95 to 105, 110 degree range, depending on their age. And with the UV light, you need this so that they grow properly and they don't get this thing called metabolic bone disease, which is basically where their bones grow brittle or improperly, which is what happened with Merlin, my bearded dragon here. And being an Australian lizard, these guys are used to getting a lot of sunlight, and these bulbs replicate those rays. And you prevent this by getting them the right UV light, because this is a diurnal basking lizard from Australia, so they are very used to the sunlight. There's two main types of bulbs you're going to use for this. The first one is a mercury vapor bulb, which combines heat and UV. It's a big bulb, and this is nice because as the bearded dragon is basking, they're also getting their UV. And the other option is going to be a tube light. This doesn't give off heat, so you will need to get another basking lamp, but this is nice because you can put it the entire length of the enclosure, and these both work really well. Now with both of these, you are going to have to as I was saying, with both of these, you are going to have to swap them out, because even though the light will still keep going, eventually they will stop emitting UV rays. So it'll look like the bulb is working, but it's not giving them the UV rays that they really need. So you're gonna have to swap this out every 6 to 12 months, depending on what type and brand you get. And these bulbs also aren't exactly cheap. They range anywhere from $30 to $60 or even $70, depending on the size and which one you get. Saying that though, don't get those crappy, cheap little like $15 to $20 twirl UV lights that you see at pet stores, because those are absolutely worthless. They give off like no UV. If you get one for your bearded dragon and you're trying to cheap out, you get for what you pay for UV. So you're gonna end up with a sick bearded dragon. So just don't get one of these. This is sort of just a general one, but bearded dragons are just very easy on beginners. They don't have any insane high heat or humidity or even space requirements like a water dragon. You can keep them on basic stuff like newspaper or reptile carpet, or you can go all out and make a bioactive setup with live plants. They don't need much for climbing. They don't get stressed out easily like frilled dragons. They can't do much damage like an iguana or a tegu. They are just a very hardy lizard. If your warm side or basking temperatures are off by a few degrees, they'll be absolutely fine. You're not going to kill your lizard. And there's a bunch of examples of owners taking their bearded dragon outside with them, hanging out on the patio, hanging out with the bearded dragon on their lap, even putting them on these little harnesses. You can get cute ones or basic ones and just letting them enjoy the natural sun that way. Basically, the most important things is just giving them a good UV light, making sure they have a high basking temperature to help with digestion, giving them the proper diet and calcium supplementation, which I didn't talk about in this video, but if you do your research, you'll learn about that. Giving them ample space. And outside of this, there isn't really a whole lot to stress over when it comes to having a bearded dragon as a pet. And this brings us to our final con, which is their diet, because bearded dragons are omnivores. They're not straight insectivores like leopard geckos. They can't just survive off a few crickets. They need a bunch of different types of food. And these food preferences also change as they grow older. When they're young, they are primarily insectivores. They're going to be eating a lot of bugs, crickets, mealworms, dubia roaches, other types of bugs. And then as they get older, they need more plant material in their diet. They're going to become more on the, not quite herbivore, but they're going to be needing more salad for sure. And this isn't just like lettuce or kale. You're going to need different varied greens. You're going to need collard greens, dandelion greens, mustard greens, escarole, endive. You can even mix the occasional fruits and vegetables in there too, like squash or strawberries. And sometimes as they grow, even though they need salad, they might not necessarily want to eat that salad, just like a human kid. So you're going to have to come up with tricks and stuff, ways to get them to eat their salad. And their diet isn't exactly complex. I mean, it's pretty easy to kind of understand what you can get and what you can't give them, but it is a step above leopard geckos and crested geckos and stuff for sure, I would say. So those were a few pros and cons cons for having a pet bearded dragon. Like the video if you learned something. Thank you to all of our amazing patrons for supporting the channel. If you'd like to do that for as low as $3 a month, link for all that will be down below. Also, comment down below which animal I should do one of these for next if you liked it. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you later.